Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 70 event, which takes place in Hollywood, Florida. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offers expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on just one total bout. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 69 went 0-2 to lose 6 units overall. We lost our underdog bets on Lucas Sajewski and Alan Patrick, and we had no free bets for the weekend. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 70 features a 9-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. And before we get started, this event has featured all kinds of different mixes and matches and late notice replacements and late fights being filled in because of several visa issues that the Brazilian fighters had. So a lot of fights have been pulled, a lot of fights have been added at the last minute. So this will be a bit of an interesting podcast. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fox Sports 2 is a bantamweight contest between Danny Martinez, who is 17-6, and Serwin Kakai, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Martinez minus 130, the comeback in Kakai minus 110, and right now at 5dimes.eu, it's minus 145 for Martinez. The comeback on Kakai is plus 105. Make sure you guys check out 5 Dimes for all the lines. That's what we're going to be using here for this podcast, as always. And moving into the matchup, man, it's definitely a tough fight because Martinez has a skill set to win this fight and make life definitely tough for Kakai, no doubt about it, because Martinez is a very solid wrestler. He's got power on the feet as well. He is a southpaw, which makes things always interesting for sure. And he likes to push a pace and be a little bit aggressive. But the problem with Martinez is his gas tank and cardio. This fight is on short notice. I mean, they put this fight together in like 1 week. And this is at 135. Martinez has been fighting at 125 as well. So he's going to be moving up a weight class again. And Kakai is still going to have to cut down to 135. So that makes things interesting as well. But as far as the matchup goes, Kakai is a pretty decent fighter in his own right, honestly. He's tough as nails, definitely. He has got that no-quit attitude, so that's what you like to see in a fighter. But as far as skill set goes, there's definitely some question marks there. But he is a well-rounded fighter as well. He's light on his feet, technical skill set, good boxing, good kicks. He moves well, and it has some speed and power. So nothing really too bad on the feet. But the problem is with Kakai is he does not get as aggressive as you'd like to see him at times. So he's not aggressive enough. He just kind of hesitates at times and lets his opponent dictate the pace. So that's what gets him in trouble a little bit on the feet. But once he gets rolling, he does have enough power, and he can be very dangerous. His takedown defense is also not the greatest. He does manage to get back up to his feet after he gets taken down most of the time. So it's hard to kind of keep him there. But he does give up some takedowns, which you don't like to see either. He does have a decent clinch game, though, overall, and even good timing with his jumping knee ability when somebody does come in and look for takedowns as well. So he's got good clinch work, timing with his knees. But at the same time, I mean, those are some attributes, again, you don't like to see when a fighter gets taken down and is able to get controlled like that. He does have an advantage over Martinez in the cardio, though. Even though this fight is short notice, I do think he's going to have the better gas tank because Martinez, even with full notice, I mean, he tends to slow down as the fight goes on. And round 2 and round 3 is going to be definitely interesting. So if Martinez does not get him out of there in round 1, I think it's very possible for Kakai to step in there and outpoint him in round 2 and round 3. Maybe even finish Martinez because Martinez does fade bad enough that, I mean, if you have somebody throwing with serious intent, he could get caught, could get in some problems there as well. So that's what makes this fight a little bit tricky, and that's why it's such a close line. And we're not seeing a whole lot of action, heavy action, at least coming one way. We're seeing a lot of two-way action on this fight, and I'm sure that'll continue as well. Tough one. I'm going to have to see the weigh-ins to make my official pick here. But for right now, I guess I have to lean just a little bit more towards Martinez just for the style matchup, because Martinez, again, with the wrestling, with the power, Kakai has been rocked in the feet in several fights. Even though he's never been officially knocked out, he's been in some trouble on the feet, and he's almost been KO'd. So that's what scares me a little bit with Kakai as well. But I think overall it's going to be a very competitive fight, a coin flip type of fight. I am slightly leaning more towards Martinez, but we'll see the weigh-ins, and I could change my mind there.
Yeah, this is one of the fights that was thrown together at the last minute just to save the event and just to give it enough fights. And it's going to be at bantamweight, which is actually a weight class above where Martinez has fought his first 2 UFC contests. So that'll be interesting, although I don't think it'll be too much of an issue because obviously he was able to make flyweight on short notice. So bantamweight will be no problem for Martinez on a short notice fight. Kakai, on the other hand, he has fought at bantamweight and at featherweight, so I think this will be a much tougher weight cut. Thankfully, he trains at American Top Team, so it's a local. He doesn't have to travel and then cut weight. And really, the toughest thing for him is just the fact that he's only going to have a week to make weight. Now, with Kakai, he is a guy that has a very, very good gas tank. That's actually probably his best attribute as a fighter. Is his conditioning is rock solid. He comes on strong late in fights, and he usually gets those late stoppages because of it after his opponents start to fade. So that's something he could take advantage of against Danny Martinez. And conditioning is usually the first thing affected by a tough weight cut. So considering how good his conditioning is, I think that even if he has a bad weight cut, it won't be too bad because his conditioning is already so good. Now, the problem here is that Martinez's fighting style actually plays right into Kakai's weaknesses. Kakai is a little bit susceptible to some good offensive wrestlers. He can be put on his back. So if Martinez is very aggressive with his wrestling, even though he's not the greatest wrestler, he's an aggressive wrestler. And that could be enough to put Kakai down. And as Nick mentioned, Kakai's chin is not very good. Yeah, he hasn't been knocked out, but his last 2 fights on the regional scene, he got blasted in the first round by some pretty subpar fighters and was able to hang on and then turn it on late and win those fights. But against a guy like Danny Martinez, I think he could get knocked out. Martinez had Scott Jorgensen on the ropes in the second round of his last fight, and if he can do that to Jorgensen, I think he can do it to Kakai. Now, the main thing here other than that is Martinez does fade, so even though he's going to be the smaller fighter that has the lesser of the weight cuts, he is going to have an issue as this fight goes on just because he's going to have to be trying to take down a big, strong guy. So Kakai, while I don't think he's anything that special, he might be able to hang on and win this fight as Martinez starts to slow down. But the main thing here is I think Martinez has enough to either get an early finish or potentially win the first 2 rounds with his power striking and wrestling before Kakai can turn it on. And I don't think Kakai can get a finish late. So my pick is Danny Martinez as he takes advantage of the slow starter, Kakai. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Steve Montgomery, who is 8-2, taking on Tony Sims, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Montgomery minus 185, the comeback on Sims plus 145. And right now it's Montgomery minus 145, the comeback on Sims plus 125. So early action has come in on Sims. They will be a little bit more balanced though as well, because I'm sure we're going to get some Montgomery action back at the sportsbooks as well, because he is a very popular fighter. I mean, he trains at American Top Team. So again, it's another situation where he's in his backyard. It's another situation where this fight was put together on relatively short notice, obviously, with all the changes as Brian mentioned earlier. So this fight is at 170. Which is actually better suited for Montgomery because Sims actually fights at 155. Now, as far as weight cut goes, that should benefit Sims, obviously. Again, it's a similar situation to the last fight as we were talking about. Sims might be the smaller guy here. Well, he's definitely going to be the smaller guy because Montgomery's actually big for 170. So Sims has his hands full in that regard. But, I mean, as far as weight cut issues go, I think Sims could handle that a little bit better, obviously, because he's not going to have a huge cut to make, typically being a 155 fighter. So getting into the matchup, though, I honestly thought the line would get bet up a little bit. I thought the more public hype would be on Montgomery. I mean, he is a popular fighter. Again, he was on the season Tough 21. He did get pulled from there from the season because of a health scare. He was removed. He basically overloaded on water and didn't get enough electrolytes. Or, I don't know all the details regarding that, but that's basically the reason he got snagged from that fight. He's he's okay health-wise, though. It wasn't a major situation. They're just trying to be a little bit safe, I guess. But right now, supposedly, he's 100%. And he's ready to go. And physically, I mean, Montgomery is definitely a beast. He's long. He's a rangy striker with a lot of power. He uses his nice elite jab well. He's got a good clinch game, huge knees that are very effective as well. And he throws some nice kicks. He's got solid wrestling and takedown defense to go along with it too. So he's a very complete fighter, but he does leave openings standing up. He can get clipped. He has been knocked out. If you look back, he was actually in the Fight Master series in Bellator. From Bellator, and he actually got knocked out in that series. So, and he's been clipped, he's been rocked, he's been knocked out before, and that all really comes down to just lack of defense standing for Montgomery. So he can dish out the punishment, but it seems like he might not be able to take it as well. So that's one head scratcher here, because Sims is actually a very talented fighter, no doubt about that. And getting into him right now, actually, I mean, Sims again is a very well-rounded fighter. He's got a boxing and wrestling background. He's got basically in his background, for those of you that don't know, he's actually got a very controversial split decision loss to Drew Dober. I thought he honestly won that fight. A lot of people would agree that he won that fight against Dober as well, but he just didn't get the nod. I mean, the judges decided to go Dober's way. Now, Dober made it a fight, no doubt about that, but he was pretty impressive. I urge you guys to check that fight out. It's available on YouTube out there. And you'll be very impressed with Sims, because Sims was effective in that fight. You could see that he's got ability with his boxing to, I mean, I think Dober's pretty tough, honestly, as far as just overall toughness. He got a solid chin, and Sims was able to drop Dober a couple times in that fight. Sims was able to take Dober down, and Dober's wrestling and takedown defense isn't that bad. So, I mean, and the way Sims was able to go about it, you'll see what I say. If you guys go out and check that fight out, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But back to other fights, I mean, if you look beyond that, Sims is just, he shows off his skill set all the time. I mean, he's that well-rounded. And he, like I said earlier, though, it is a question mark a little bit, because he's taking this on fight short notice, and he usually fights at 155. But he is a very aggressive striker. And again, with his boxing comes a little bit of power to go along with it. He switches stance often on the feet, so that's a little bit tricky. He uses southpaw a lot to throw the person off, so you could see a lot of southpaw versus southpaw here getting into this battle, because Montgomery likes to fight southpaw as well. And his defense could be a little bit better. Sims does get tagged as well, but I think he's a little bit more defensively sound than Montgomery here. And his takedown defense, I think, is a little bit better as well. So I think Sims is going to be the better wrestler. Even though he's outsized here, he's going to be the better wrestler. I think he's going to be the better striker in this matchup as well. And I think he can do enough damage, even though he's a smaller guy, to possibly get Montgomery out of there. If he doesn't, I think he could do enough to probably outpoint Montgomery along the way and win on the cards. So I'm actually going to pick the underdog here in Sims. I think he's just the better, more talented fighter. The scary part here is Montgomery is definitely capable of finishing fights. I mean, he's got 5 knockouts on his resume, a couple sub-wins as well, and just his physical size and his ability to strike with power, it makes him always dangerous with any leg. I mean, he can knock you out with either hand, either leg, knees, elbows, anything. So that's the dangerous part. But I think if Montgomery doesn't get Sims out of there, he's probably going to get finished himself, or he'll lose on the cards. So my official pick is going to be Sims. Again, you got to check out the weigh-ins, though, to make sure everything's up to par here. So the weigh-ins are going to be very important for this event, with all the changes and all the craziness going on from top to bottom. But my pick is going to be Sims to win this fight.
Montgomery is a natural welterweight. Sims is a natural lightweight. So Montgomery is 15 pounds heavier, 5 inches taller. He's got a longer reach. So Sims has his work cut out for him if he wants to get inside and make something happen. And Montgomery, while he does have some really good power, he does not have very good defense or a very good chin. So how these guys match up, Montgomery is a guy that's very dangerous with kicks, knees, elbows, punches, everything. He's not the most technically sound guy, but he does have really good power. And if he clips you with something, he will finish you. I mean, you saw that in his last fight for Titan against Brock Jardine. I mean, all it took was one knee during a takedown attempt, and it was over. With Tony Sims, he's a guy that's very, very sneaky, well-rounded. He's been under the radar mainly because of that loss to Drew Dober, but in my opinion, it wasn't a loss. That's why I haven't been the highest on Drew Dober overall, because I thought that he lost the fight that actually earned him his UFC debut. Sims blasted him a few times. It was a good fight, but Sims had his number, in my opinion, and he's done nothing but impress with all of his fights lately. Now, their wins have not been on Sherdog, but you can watch them on YouTube. They're on MMA, mixedmartialarts.tv. You can check those out. And he's defended his title twice in the last year, and he looked really good. So I think Sims is in a good spot right here. He has very solid overall pressure and offensive striking where he can get inside on opponents even if they are a little bit bigger than him. And he mixes in really good takedowns, can get on top of you and do some serious damage. So I think with this fight being put together on such short notice, it does give Sims a little bit of an advantage because, as we saw on The Ultimate Fighter, Montgomery does have a tough weight cut to get to 170, and he's doing it quickly. Now, Montgomery was planning on competing later this summer in a fight, so he got yanked from that and pulled into this one. So he was in training camp. It didn't just come out of nowhere, so he's probably ready physically, but it is not much time to really prepare a weight cut. So that is something to really keep an eye on, especially after what happened on The Ultimate Fighter. And overall, I think that if these guys are trading blow for blow, while Montgomery has a little bit more pure punching power, Sims has a much better chin. So I think that Sims probably will get the better of it if these guys are trading punch for punch. And Montgomery isn't really the type of guy that uses his range very well. He's just a tall, stand-up straight, and while he does throw some decent kicks, they're not the most technically sound kicks, so I don't think Sims has too much to worry about from those. And I think with Sims training in Colorado, he's going to be coming into this fight very aggressive, with a lot of confidence in his ability to go the distance if need be, and I think that he can wear Montgomery down and take him out, probably knock him out. So my pick is Tony Sims to pull off the slight upset. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Leandro Silva, who is 17-2-1 with 1 no contest, taking on Luis Gonzalez, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Silva minus 160, the comeback on Gonzalez plus 120, and right now over at 5 dimes. Line margin just basically tightened up a little bit. It's Silva minus 150, the comeback on Gonzalez plus 130. So line staying steady. A little bit of two-way action going on here with this fight. A lot of split opinions on it as well, because it is a very close matchup, honestly. I mean, these guys, again, another spot where they're taking the fight on short notice. They're coming into this fight. Gonzalez is taking this fight at 170. He normally fights at 155. Silva's obviously been fighting at 155 recently as well. But both these guys, not taking a bad weight cut here either, because it is on short notice. So Gonzalez getting into the UFC, I'm sure that was a win for him as well. That was motivation enough to take this fight, win or lose. I'm sure he's going to get another shot here. So it's kind of a low pressure situation for both fighters, honestly, regarding this, the way this fight was set up. And they do match up well. I mean, both guys, they like to grind you out. They like to get the fight to the floor. They like to use their grappling ability, their submission ability to finish fights on the floor as well. But they're more than that. Again, they're just kind of grinders. I mean, they get the fight to the floor. They look to ground and pound a little bit. They look to just grind you out and win the decision more so on points than anything else. I know that Silva, especially outside of the UFC, he's got more submission victories, and he's had submission wins in the UFC as well. But that being said, I mean, he's more of a decision type of fighter in the UFC as well. And Gonzalez, again, I can say the same thing about him. So what I think here we're going to see is Gonzalez being a little bit more aggressive on the feet. I think overall, skill set for skill set, Silva might be the more complete fighter, because I think on the feet he's a little bit more technically sound, because he can mix everything up with his kickboxing. Even though Silva's more known for his grappling, his stand-up game's not really that bad. It's just with Silva, he doesn't get aggressive enough. I mean, he's too tentative at times, and his output just seems to stop at times, and that gets him beaten fights for sure. With Gonzalez, again, he's not, I don't want to say sloppy at times, but I don't think he's as technical or as clean as Silva is, and he doesn't mix up his kicks as well as Silva either. But at the same time, Gonzalez has a steady pressure, and he comes forward with this punch, and his boxing can be effective because he has a little bit of power with it as well, but he's not known for his striking. So I think Gonzalez is going to probably be the aggressor here on the feet, pushing the pace on Silva a little bit more. Both of these guys are going to jock for position on the ground. I think we're going to see both in top position at one time or another. So it'll be a very competitive fight. I mean, this is going to be a true MMA fight that really takes place all over the octagon, honestly, on the floor, against the cage, and then, of course, standing up as well. So very competitive fight, very interesting fight. I'm actually going to lead a little bit more towards Gonzalez in this spot, because I think that with his constant pressure and his constant attack, I think he can win on the scorecards, honestly. So a tough competitive fight, but I think Gonzalez will do enough to probably get the win here. And I know Silva has improved, and he's looked a little bit better recently in the UFC. So could be wrong here, and Silva might show up and just dominate with this fight. I don't think that's going to be the case. So I think, like I said, my head tells me that Gonzalez will probably do enough to win on points here. Probably not finish Silva, but at least get a very close competitive decision. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, this fight is definitely tricky. Gonzalez is making his UFC debut on short notice, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem because, again, just like in earlier fights on the card, this fight's taking place a weight class up. So Silva, while normally at lightweight, is fighting at welterweight here as well. So both these guys are natural lightweights fighting up a weight class, so the weight cut is going to be pretty easy on short notice. And I just think the biggest difference here is Lewis hasn't fought in the UFC yet. Now, in terms of strength of opposition, Luis Gonzalez has fought a who's who of some of the best guys on the regional scene, so he's more than prepared to face somebody like Leandro Silva. I'm just not quite sure that he's going to actually be able to come in here and do it. Gonzalez and Silva actually have similar styles. They both have very good ground games, and while Gonzalez probably has a little bit better wrestling than Silva, I think Silva can hold his own in the submissions and sweeps department, and in terms of the feet, while Gonzalez is a little bit more active with his striking, I think Silva is the better technical striker with a little bit more power. So Lewis isn't a very technical guy, but he can get outworked if Silva actually does manage to get some good counter-striking going or anything. Now, the big problem with Silva is while he is a decent striker on the feet, he does have a tendency to be very inactive. That's how Drew Dober was able to win the first round against him in that last fight, which ended by the controversial second-round guillotine. But this time around, I don't see either guy really submitting the other. They're both too competent on the ground to really be able to do that. And what it's going to come down to is who's going to be able to hold the better position on the ground and in the clinch, and who's going to be the more active, aggressive striker. So that does slightly lean towards Gonzalez with his pace, but I think that Silva is his technical advantages on the feet actually could be the difference maker here, and he could crack Gonzalez with some big shots here that could turn the tide. So while this fight is really, really close in my opinion, I'm slightly leaning with the UFC veteran here to pull off the win and continue his a little bit of momentum that he's been building up. So my pick is Leandro Silva. Now again, sticking in the welterweight division, we have Alex Oliveira, who is 11-2-1 with 1 no contests, taking on Joe Merritt, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Oliveira minus 350, the comeback on Merritt plus 250, and right now it's Oliveira minus 440, the comeback on Merritt is plus 350. So opened Oliveira pretty high, and the public agrees with it, and they actually bet him up a little bit. And Merritt is actually an undefeated prospect. He's 31 years old, so prospect's kind of tough, but at the same time, I mean, he's younger in MMA fights and MMA years, I guess you could say. So but he is definitely a talented guy. He trains with Lorenz Larkin, so he's got a decent camp and training partners behind him as well. Another 1 week notice type of fight for both of these guys. Oliveira obviously has taken fights on short notice in the UFC before, so this is no change at all to him, and he's performed awesome. I mean, in both of his fights in the UFC this far, Oliveira's looked great, and he's 1-1. So I mean, his loss obviously was definitely not too bad considering. I mean, he was fighting a very talented grappler in Gilbert Burns, and the way that fight went, he was actually winning until the very end there. So, and then of course he was more than impressive against KJ Newens in his last fight. He was getting tagged a little bit on the feet, but he did what he had to do and got the fight to the floor and ended it there as well. So you'd like to see that fight IQ from Oliveira. And again, he's very talented on the feet. He's very talented as far as the wrestling and his submission game on the ground. So he's a very tough out. Now Merritt, again, he's basically a newbie, though. I mean, his resume overall is very weak. That's one problem here. Oliveira is by far the best guy Merritt's ever faced. So that's definitely one thing that bothers me about this fight. I don't know if Merritt's going to be ready for a step up in competition like this. But overall, honestly, from what you see against Merritt beating some of the low-level competition that he's faced, he's not bad. I mean, he's primarily a striker, striking-based fighter. He's long, should have a small reach advantage in this fight as well. Very athletic. And again, he does have good training partners coming in. So he's fought, at least in the gym, he's been training with a decent competition, even though his, real competition has not been that great. So I think that's going to benefit him. I mean, always coming from a good camp definitely pays dividends and most times. So he'll probably show up a little bit better than we all think and make this fight at least interesting, especially on the feet. Because he does move pretty well on the feet, no doubt about it. Has good hands, throws effective elbows, mixes in kicks okay as well. So we should see a pretty interesting and pretty, I think, fun striking matchup for a little while here until Oliveira, I think, decides to probably take this fight to the floor. And then he should have his way with Merritt on the ground. I think that that's where Oliveira is going to have his biggest advantage in this fight. Is honestly, I mean, he'll have the knockout power on the feet as well. But I think that he could take this fight to the floor. He could basically control and dictate where this fight goes, and he can win this fight by submission. He can win this fight again on the feet, and he could just win this fight by control if he has to. So big step up for Merritt. I don't think it's going to go too well because Oliveira's looked great. And again, he's been in this situation with short notice. So I think that's really benefits him as well, where Merritt's kind of going to have the octagon jitters coming into this fight. Oliveira should be a lot more comfortable and calm. So I know it's a steep line out there right now. It's minus 440 or so. I don't know if there's value on 440. I'm not saying that, but as far as a pure pick goes, I think you have to lean towards Oliveira.
My main problem here with Joe Merritt is he's making this UFC debut after very little experience against top competition. While he is the bigger fighter than Alex Oliveira because he is actually a natural welterweight that's actually fought at middleweight successfully in the past, and Oliveira is more of a lightweight, the big problem is Merritt really hasn't faced anybody. I mean, he had one fight in RFA before this, and then he had multiple fights in that Explode Fight Series promotion that is just the most one-sided promotion in the United States. They just feed cans to their prospects and then feed them to the UFC. And those guys have not done well once they got to the UFC because they just never got prepared for facing really good fighters. And I think that that's going to be the problem here because Alex Oliveira is a legit fighter. He's a talented striker, a very dangerous, aggressive striker, and he mixes in a decent top control game and some good submissions. I mean, he's a good, well-rounded guy that came out of nowhere. And he is living up to that cowboy nickname. This is already his third fight in the UFC in only a couple months. This guy just is super active, takes any fight the UFC offers on short notice, and he's a very game, even in different weight classes. So I think against a guy like Joe Merritt, I think Alex Oliveira is going to be extremely aggressive. He's going to try to put him away on the feet. If that doesn't work, he's going to try to put him away on the ground, and that should work. Because Merritt is a very good striker, actually. He's very dangerous. He's pretty lethal. He's pretty lethal from just about every limb. He can hurt you with knees, punches, elbows, kicks. I just don't think that he's up to the challenge here against somebody of Alex Oliveira's caliber. Merritt can hurt you if he gets on top, but how is he going to get on top against Oliveira? He just doesn't quite have the wrestling or the other parts of his game to match up with his athleticism and striking. So while he is a protege of Lorenz Larkin, he fights like Larkin a little bit on the feet, he's not quite seasoned enough to come in here against somebody like Oliveira and pull it off. So I expect Alex Oliveira to win this fight however he really wants, but I expect it to actually go to the ground and Oliveira to pull off another submission just like he did against KJ Nunes. So my pick is Alex Oliveira. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 main card, we have Hakran Diaz, who is 22-3-1, taking on Levon Makashvili, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Diaz minus 270, the comeback on Makashvili plus 190, and right now it is Diaz actually minus 185, Makashvili is plus 160. So overall action has come in on the underdog a little bit more. And you know what? I can understand it because this should be a very competitive fight because these guys match up so well. Makashvili, I think, lost a little bit of respect, or I thought he would lose a little bit of respect in his debut against Diva. Now, Diva is a very tough fighter. I think he's a very underrated fighter, but I think he just doesn't get a ton of respect from the bettors out there or the MMA community in general. And Makashvili, you know what? He won that fight, in my opinion, but Diva was game enough that I think that he would probably have dropped Makashvili's stock a little bit, even despite the win for Makashvili in that fight, if that makes sense. But nevertheless, I mean, the action is coming in on Makashvili early on. I think people respect his overall ability, and he is a very good, talented fighter, talented prospect at really age 26, because he's got such a well-rounded skill set. Getting into the fight, the way these guys match up, starting off with Makashvili first, I mean, he's a well-rounded prospect, as I just mentioned, coming off a successful debut win. He's underrated overall, I think, but at the same time, he does have some flaws, and part of those flaws are actually his inactivity at times. I mean, on the feet, I think he's got decent boxing, decent kickboxing overall as well, decent leg kicks to go along with it. But the problem is, again, he gets tentative. He's another one of these guys that you would like to see be just a little bit more consistent in the flow of his striking game, and it's just not that. But he does make up for it with, shooting in, getting the fight up against the cage, getting some takedowns as well. He's got good ground and pound on the floor. He's got a decent submission game, even though he's got no official submissions on his resume. He's definitely well-rounded. His sub-defense is good as well. So he's got the total package as far as MMA skill set goes. But the problem again is that he's just a little bit too tentative at times. And I think Diaz is going to be the aggressor here. I think Diaz is going to be a little bit physically stronger as well. And you could say a lot of the same things I just did about Makashvili about Diaz as well. But he's more of a grappling based fighter. He's very strong for his weight class. Diaz is improving his striking game, fight by fight. You see the improvements in his game. I mean, when he first entered the UFC, he was basically known for his grappling only, but now he's starting to put together some decent boxing. He's got a little bit of power, to go along with it on the feet. So you can't take him lightly, even in the striking game for sure here. And I think he could probably be more of the consistent, aggressive fighter on the feet. I think he could probably control and ping Makashvili up against the cage a little bit more. I think the takedown game is going to be back and forth. I think they're going to look for takedowns. I think they're going to neutralize each other in that regard and stuff each other's takedowns here and there. But I think that Diaz is probably going to be the one to kind of dictate and control the pace of the fight. So I'm expecting a very, very competitive fight here. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Makashvili does come through and get the W in this spot, because I think if it hits the scorecards, it's going to be that competitive. But at the same time, I think Diaz, just his overall power and his aggressiveness is probably going to come through and win him this fight. I do think it hits the cards, no doubt about it, because I think they've neutralized each other out so well that it's, I don't think there's a real threat of a finish here from either guy, even though Diaz does have quite a few submissions on his resume. I just think the way he matches up with Makashvili, I don't think he's going to probably sub Makashvili or even knock him out. So I think it's going to be a close competitive fight throughout, but I think Diaz is going to do enough to push the pace and win on the card. So my official pick is going to be Diaz.
Yeah, this is actually a really tricky fight because while Hakran Diaz has been a prospect in the UFC for a long time, he's kind of cemented himself as a really solid top 15 featherweight. Levan Makashvili is an excellent prospect that has debuted in the UFC. Now, Makashvili just fought 6 weeks ago for his UFC debut against Marco Diva, and he looked pretty good. It was a close, tough, competitive battle, but his takedowns made the difference. Now, against Hakran Diaz, I don't think the takedowns will make the difference because Diaz is so good with his ground game, both offensively with his wrestling and defensively with his takedown defense. So I think Makashvili is going to have his hands full if he has to rely on that takedowns and his own wrestling to make things happen. Now, against Diaz, I think Diaz is the better, more aggressive striker. Makashvili, while he does have some excellent technical striking ability, his problem is when he's striking, he has a tendency to have a really slow pace, pick his spots too much, be inactive. And while Diaz can do that too, especially because he's more of a counter striker, this could lead to a very, very slow-paced striking battle, especially if Makashvili and Diaz cannot get their grappling games going. Now, Diaz is a very, very seasoned veteran now, having 26 professional fights under his belt, and I think that Makashvili, while he is a really good prospect, I think he's getting thrown into the fire a little too quickly here. And Diaz is just a little bit better than him in all areas, especially activity and pace. And I just don't think Makashvili's really good wrestling and technical striking is going to make up the difference. So I expect Diaz to win this fight just about all areas. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Thiago Santos, who is 10-3, taking on Steve Bossé, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Santos minus 170. The comeback on Bossé is plus 130. And right now it's actually got bet up a little bit. It's Santos minus 185. The comeback on Bossé is plus 160. So a little bit more love and support coming in on Santos. I'll tell you what, Santos has looked really good recently. He's definitely improved his place in the UFC because honestly, making his debut, coming off the Ultimate Fighter show, of course, not having a tremendous amount of success there, losing to Ferreira like he did with that quick guillotine choke. A lot of people thought that he was just have a couple fights, I think, in the UFC and then be done. I don't think they respected his stand-up game for what it is. But he did look good against Marquez and then, Ronnie Marks, I should say. And then, of course, Andy Enz in his last fight. And he also was fairly competitive with Hall in between those. So Santos has the ability on the feet. I mean, he's long. He's a rangy striker again. He's got decent movement on the feet a little bit. He likes to switch stances and mix things up on the feet. So, you know what? He's dangerous. He's got a lot of power to go along with it. He's got a very kick-heavy game, which can be a little bit tricky at times for people as well. But he could be effective with his striking game, obviously. I mean, he's got several knockouts on his resume, so he's a threat on the feet. But his defense on the feet is a concern. I don't think he's defensively sound at all. I think his chin is a little bit concerning as well. He's been knocked out before. But he has been getting a little bit more confidence, I think, because he's been getting a couple, he has a couple solid wins in the UFC now, and he's been getting a little bit more aggressive on the feet as well. So with all that being said, Santos is in a really good spot. He wants to continue that momentum. But this is an interesting fight with Bossé. I mean, obviously, Bossé, as we all know, he's a very popular Canadian hockey star, former hockey star, I should say. He was an enforcer, and he's a tough guy. I mean, he was known for that tough guy reputation in his hockey days, and he is. I mean, just that. The problem with Bossé is he's been a little bit inconsistent, though. He's been out since 2013, almost really inactive for the last 4 years. He's had only about 2 fights, so that's one big question mark. I mean, he's had a lot of injuries throughout his career as well. That's kind of plagued him a little bit. But overall, I think Bossé's not bad. I think he's honestly a little bit underrated, to be honest with you. From what I hear out there from the MMA fans, I think this guy's kind of a can. He's got bad cardio. You can't really trust the guy. You could say he does tend to slow down a little bit, definitely, as the fight goes on. But as far as skill set goes, training with TriStar has really helped him, because I think he's really evolved into a very complete MMA fighter. I mean, he's more than just your hockey type of brawler that I think a lot of people are expecting in the cage. I mean, the guy's really worked on his ground game a lot. He's got underrated offensive wrestling. He's got underrated takedown defense to go along with it as well, because he manages to scramble and get back up out of bad spots. And then, of course, he's got knockout power on the feet with both hands, really. And he's got a very solid clinch game, which is not really a surprise. And his chin is decent, and he's very tough as well. So I think Bossé is honestly the better fighter overall here. I mean, Santos is going to be longer. Santos is going to be more dangerous. I think Santos is definitely going to have the cardio edge. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Santos eventually maybe, land something and get Bossé out of there, especially in maybe round 2, round 3. But I think he's going to have to weather a very tough storm early on. And I think Bossé, if he fights smart, and of course now he's had time to train. I mean, this isn't another one of those situations where this fight was put together on 1 week's notice. I mean, Bossé was actually supposed to step in there and fight against for Rampage and fight against Maldonado not too long ago. So he was taking that fight on short notice. He's been able to kind of regroup since he was pulled out of that fight, and now he's had a full training camp. And I think he's going to be impressive here, to be honest with you. It's a tough fight with Santos, but I think he's the better fighter, so I'm going to have to pick him. I know that's probably going to be against the grain with what a lot of people are thinking out there, but I really do think he's got enough knockout power on the feet to go forward, even against a good striker like Santos, and clip him on the chin, maybe put him out. I think Bossé actually could get some takedowns in this fight as well. And that could make life interesting for him and Santos as well. So my concern is definitely out there, though, for Bossé with his inactivity, like I just mentioned, and his cardio a little bit. But I do think he is, at this time, the more well-rounded fighter, and this is a winnable fight for him. So I'm going to go against the grain and pick Bossé to win this fight.
Now, Thiago Santos is not a world beater by any stretch of the imagination. He is one of those fighters that, even though he's not a big middleweight, he has decided that he doesn't want to make that cut to welterweight. He doesn't think it's worth it. So, and it's paid off. It's paid dividends, because he's 2-2 in the UFC, and both of his wins have been very quick first-round knockouts. Now, one of his losses was where he got blasted in the feet and then finished with a submission, and then he went the distance in a competitive fight against Uriah Hall. So, he's been able to hang in there against some pretty good fighters. Now, Steve Bossé, there's a lot of unknown variables with him. The big thing, obviously, is he's had a full training camp for this fight for his UFC debut instead of taking it on short notice like he was expecting against Fabio Maldonado. And he's fighting down a weight class from what he was originally going to be fighting. So I think that is a bit to his advantage, that he actually has time to fully prepare. And with Santos and Boss, the main thing here is Santos does not have a very good chin, and he doesn't have very good striking defense. So Bossé even if he's not the most seasoned guy and he's rusty, all it takes is one good strike and Santos could go down. Santos is one of those types of fighters that is just all about the knockout. He will just push a high pace. He will wing strikes at you, hoping that one hits. And if it does, he does have the power to finish the fight. He actually has a really good left body kick. That's how he's actually finished both of his UFC fights so far, have been good body kicks that hurt his opponents and set up the finish. So if Bossé is taking Santos lightly by any stretch, then Santos is going to be able to connect with something and hurt him. So really, my other big thing with Bossé that scares me is the fact that he has taken so much damage throughout his entire professional sports career, because he was an enforcer in hockey, had tons of concussions, tons of shoulder injuries, tons of different injuries to his body. So there's a lot of wear and tear on this guy. And on top of that, I mean, he retired briefly. Like, 'cause he had announced that he was going to make his UFC debut and then had to pull out of the fight with a shoulder injury and just retired from MMA. Now, obviously, that didn't last forever. He came back, and now he's going to make his UFC debut again officially. But, you know, there's a lot that says a lot about the injuries and wear and tear this guy's had, that he was so close to calling it quits just because of some of the injuries that have started to mount up. Now, Bossé does train at a great gym at TriStar, so I'm sure that he's getting some work with some of the best in the world, both coaches and training partners. But I don't know if that's enough. I mean, he's been so inactive, hasn't really done anything over the last couple of years, and Santos has stayed active. Now, if Santos just leaves his chin out there and lets Bossé crack him or allows Bossé to score some takedowns, Santos is going to be in trouble. But I think because of Santos' crazy pace and just how hard he pushes, I think Santos can either get a knockout or win a decision, but probably get a knockout at some point, if especially if Bossé is not as explosive and athletic as I'm expecting, just because of all the mounting injuries. So I'm leaning slightly with Thiago Santos, and I think the veteran pulls it off. Now, sticking with the middleweight division, we have Antonio Carlos Jr. dropping down with a 5-1 record, taking on Eddie Gordon, who is 8-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Carlos Jr. minus 210, the comeback on Gordon plus 160, and right now the line is Jr. minus 200, the comeback is plus 170, so line margins kind of tighten up a little bit. This line has been bouncing back and forth. Early action came in on Carlos Jr., and then back we go with Gordon as well. So a lot of split opinions on this fight, and I understand it, honestly. I do lean a little bit more towards Carlos Jr. in this fight, obviously. I think the guy definitely has a talented skill set. He can be very good. He's still only 25 years old, so I think he's definitely a prospect, especially now at 185. He is dropping down to 185 after his loss to Cummings and, at 205. And after winning, actually, the Ultimate Fighter, too, which was impressive, honestly. I mean, it is what it is. I know the competition level wasn't the greatest for him there, but still, I mean, the guy has been on the radar for a little while now. A lot of people think that this guy could be really good, and I agree. I mean, because he has – I guess he's not the most feared striker on the feet, but he's got enough knockout power in his hands and his feet that he can make, do some damage and make life miserable for his opponents on the feet a little bit too. But he's more well known, obviously, for his grappling ability. His jiu-jitsu. He's definitely got a very good submission game. But the problem with him is fight IQ sometimes, honestly. I mean, he puts himself in some bad spots. He does tend to gas a little bit as the fight goes too. So he's the type of fighter that shows good takedown defense overall, but then he does let himself get kind of taken down because he's got so much confidence in his jiu-jitsu, which at times we all know, I mean, if you can't, I mean, off your back, I think, especially these days in MMA, there's less probability to come out of subs, especially, I mean, the way people train, they're obviously, game and aware of the submissions, with the triangles, with the arm bars, with some of the sweeps and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more difficult, with basically the way people train these days to hit a submission off your back. And I think some of the jiu-jitsu guys just get a little bit too comfortable laying there and going for subs that they don't hit. So I know Carlos Jr. was actually pretty impressive in some fashion against Cummings, because he had Cummings in some pretty bad spots on the ground, but credit Cummings for getting out of those positions and just continuing to do what he did. So that's what Gordon's going to have to do in this fight, honestly, is kind of follow, I think, Cummings' game plan. And Gordon really doesn't have the cardio that Cummings did, because he obviously slows down quite a bit. Gordon's been a little bit of a letdown overall as well. I mean, he's obviously an Ultimate Fighter champion, and a lot of people were expecting some really good things out of Gordon. And then, to be honest with you, he comes out and really has looked, in my opinion, terrible. After he came out and beat Diego Lima in the finals for the Ultimate Fighter, I mean, he goes out there, he was doing well against Salmon, and then he gets knocked out by a head kick. Then against Chris Dempsey, which he was a big favorite against the Dempsey fight, he loses a very controversial but close decision. I mean, make no mistake, a lot of people might think that he won that fight, but it was close enough to give to Dempsey, I mean, on the scorecards, especially with the state of MMA judging these days. So you can't argue that Dempsey didn't win that fight, or you could argue it, but it was close enough that, Gordon kind of dropped the ball on that fight. So he's been a little bit of a letdown, especially considering he trains with guys like Weidman, and he's got good training partners, but Gordon's cardio lets him down. His chin is very suspect as well. Talk about fight IQ. He's got some issues there. But overall, his skill set is decent. I mean, he's got wrestling and boxing, which you like to see. I mean, those usually fighters that have a little bit of wrestling and boxing backgrounds do relatively well in the UFC, no doubt about it, in MMA in general. But again, his strike defense is very questionable. His chin is very questionable as well. So he will look to wrestle in this fight, and that's his path to victory here. And if he can get Junior on his back and on the floor and stay out of submission trouble, which I think he might be able to, honestly, he will do okay and probably grind out a win here. But that being said, I do still favor Carlos Jr. in this fight, like I said earlier, because I think that Carlos Jr. is more of the prospect in this case. He is dropping down to, like I said, 185 for this fight. I think this weight class is probably better for him. It's going to be interesting to see how well he makes the weight cut and how he looks at the weigh-ins. But I think Carlos Jr., even standing, he'll be able to do okay, and he'll be effective enough to give Gordon some problems on the feet. And I think his takedown defense, believe it or not, might be better suited at 185 and might hang in there. If he drops to his back and doesn't get the submission win, though, it's going to be a little frustrating, especially for Carlos Jr. backers. But that being said, overall, I think he could give him enough fits on the ground if it does stay on the floor that Gordon could be in some trouble there. And then again, I just don't trust Gordon's cardio. I don't trust his chin. And I do trust a little bit more with Carlos Jr. I think Carlos Jr. will be fine. It's still dangerous, I guess, throughout 3 rounds, where Gordon will get less dangerous as the fight goes on as well. So, and his takedowns might get harder and harder to come by. So I am going to pick Carlos Jr. I think he's simply the better fighter, the better prospect, and he could definitely win this fight. So that's the way I'm going.
Eddie Gordon has been a huge letdown so far in this UFC run, especially his last 2 fights. And against a guy like Antonio Carlos Jr., I think that just falls right into some of his own issues. Gordon pretty much has a good offensive wrestling game, and his striking is very lackluster. His chin is not very good, and I don't think his submission defense is that great, although we haven't really seen it tested too much. But against a guy like Antonio Carlos Jr., who is going to be pretty big for the middleweight division. I mean, he wasn't a huge heavyweight when he won. He wasn't a very big light heavyweight, but he wasn't a super small one. But he's going to be a very big middleweight dropping down. So I think Carlos Jr. is going to have the size and strength advantage, which is going to make it difficult for Gordon to get that wrestling going, because honestly, that's the only way Gordon wins this fight, because Carlos Jr. has a way better chin. Carlos Jr. has more punching power, and Carlos Jr. has better submission ability. And I think Carlos Jr. can scramble and sweep and hold his own on the ground with Gordon, even though Gordon does have the solid wrestling background. So I think Gordon is going to have his hands full here. And unlike the Patrick Cummins fight, Carlos Jr. isn't facing a guy that has a high motor, that's bigger than him, that has that super elite wrestling ability. And I don't expect Carlos Jr. to just be dropping for submissions and giving up position repeatedly like he did in his last fight. I think he learned his lesson, because, it was exciting to see him go for all those, but every time Cummins slipped out, it was just another minute or 2 of Cummins being in top and controlling. And I don't think that's going to happen here against Gordon, because Carlos Jr. should be big enough and strong enough that if he fails on any of that type of stuff, he can either get back to his feet or make a transition and secure a better position. So I think Carlos Jr. is underrated striking. He had some pretty impressive knockouts on the show, and if he cracks Gordon with something big, I think Gordon will be in big, big trouble. And in terms of everything else, I just don't see a lot out of Gordon. I'm actually almost surprised that he's given another chance, despite the wrestling, the 6-figure contract for winning the Ultimate Fighter. So I think Antonio Carlos Jr. makes an impressive debut here in the middleweight division. So I like Antonio Carlos Jr. here. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the welterweight division, we have Santiago Ponzinibbio, who is 21-2, taking on Lorenz Larkin, who is 15-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Man, this is really a great fight. I opened Larkin minus 210. The comeback on Ponzinibbio plus 160, and right now it's Larkin minus 230. The comeback on Ponzinibbio is plus 190. So a little bit more support coming in on Larkin, but early on it was Larkin dropping because more action came in on Ponzinibbio as well. So there is two-way action on this fight, no doubt about it, and it will continue to be two-way action on this fight as well. I think we see it stay close to 2-1, maybe with some heavy action on fight day, one way or the other. We could see some movement, more movement here, but it's going to be an interesting fight because both these guys like to stand and bang, and both these guys are talented at doing so. So we should see a very entertaining fight. So that being said, the way these guys match up, it's tough because, Ponzinibbio is definitely kind of under the radar, and he's been throughout his UFC career. Now, finally, I think people are starting to respect him a little bit more and really know what this guy can do, and that's knock people out. I mean, he's got 11 knockouts on his resume for a reason. Not just that, but he's got a little bit underrated wrestling to go along with it, and he's also, I think, the more well-rounded fighter between the two because he's got some underrated submission skill to go along with it. So he's a very complete fighter with very dangerous knockout ability for sure. The problem with Ponzinibbio on the feet is he's a little slow and predictable at times. He's not active enough at times either. And his defense and his chin is a little bit bothersome and concerning as well because, he has been rocked. He's been knocked out in the past, but he's been rocked in several fights now. And against a guy like Larkin, you don't get too many second chances. So even though his recovery ability, Ponzinibbio's recovery ability isn't bad, he still can't take too much punishment from a guy like Larkin because Larkin does have that killer instinct. Yeah, so does Ponzinibbio, no doubt about it. In fact, one of the best things about Ponzinibbio, in my opinion, is that killer instinct because once he lands that first punch and rocks you, he flurries and you cannot weather that storm. He just puts it on you until you're out of there. He hasn't done it in just one fight. He's done it a few times. So Ponzinibbio is definitely a killer on the feet, especially when he lands. But I think as far as striking matchups go, again, Larkin is the better overall striker, no doubt about it. I think Larkin's a little bit more technical. He's got the speed advantage. He's looked great at 170 pounds. Now, this is only his second fight at 170. So, and the way he disposed of John Howard early in his debut at 170, it's kind of tough to say, how Larkin's going to be throughout a 3-round fight. But that being said, what we did get to see in that quick fight, Larkin looked sharp. His speed and power was off the hook in that fight. The way Larkin goes about his striking is really smooth because, he's just unpredictable again. He can kick you, his angles that he uses for his kicks and his punches, or he's just a threat everywhere. He even throws some nice little sneaky elbows in there. He just has a very good fight IQ on the feet, and he just hits you with such a variety of skill that it's hard to deal with. With the speed and power to go along with it. So Larkin, a very dangerous fighter. But the problem with Larkin also is, he has been clipped. He has been knocked out before, of course. So again, he's got a little bit of chin issues, overall. And I think Ponzinibbio, he matches up well with him because Ponzinibbio is the type of fighter that does really pose a huge knockout threat to Larkin as well. Because if they get in a firefight, it's honestly going to be who lands the cleanest punch that goes down first in this situation. So it's a tough fight to call and a tough fight to bet, honestly, because of that reason alone. I expect Larkin to go out there and do his thing, and I think he's going to be the better striker overall, and I think he's going to be a little bit more effective in the striking game because, again, Ponzinibbio, I think at times is just a little bit too tentative, and Larkin's going to be a little bit sharper, but both these guys can knock each other out. I also think Ponzinibbio is going to look for takedowns in this fight as well because his wrestling is a tad bit underrated, and he's able to get the fight to the floor. Now, Larkin's takedown defense has really improved quite a bit. He's showed that time and time again because he's been taken down and controlled by wrestlers in the past. So he definitely wants to avoid that. And at 170, I think it should be even better. But that being said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Ponzinibbio does sneak a quick takedown or two along the way. Larkin, I think, has the ability to scramble back up and keep the fight continuing on the feet. So that's why this fight should be so fun. But again, it's probably a dog or pass situation, but I'm honestly going to pick Larkin because I do think he is the better striker, and you got a striker versus striker matchup here. So I'm leaning a little bit more towards Larkin in this spot, but great fight. Really looking forward to it. It should be fight of the night.
And while I can completely understand wanting to pick Larkin here, he is a pretty good favorite, I just think that Ponzinibbio has a little bit more to offer. The main difference between both of these guys is the fact that Ponzinibbio does mix it up a little bit more. Larkin likes to be in open space where he can work his kicks, work his straight punches, and just mix in some of the flashy style that he likes to use on the feet. Ponzinibbio is a guy that just gets in your face, throws big flurries, and just tries to overwhelm you. And that's actually a style that has given Lorenz Larkin fits in the past, especially when Constantino Philippou was able to do that against him and just keep that pressure, get right in his face, and keep going, backing him towards the fence repeatedly and forcing Lorenz to have to wing some big punches. Now, Larkin looked great in that last fight against John Howard, but Howard is not nearly as promising of a striker as Ponzinibbio, and he's not as quick or as athletic, and I think Ponzinibbio is going to be able to get in there and just start winging that big right hook after throwing the left jab, and if it connects, Larkin's going to be in big trouble. And the fact that Ponzinibbio can mix in takedowns could just give Lorenz that slight hesitation too. So there's a bit of a more multifaceted threat from Ponzinibbio. Now Larkin, he is the better technical striker. I definitely feel he can mix in the kicks better than Ponzinibbio does. I think that he can counter-strike better than Ponzinibbio. So if Ponzinibbio is just reckless and wild, he'll walk right into a big counter shot from Larkin and get knocked out. And hands down, whoever lands the first huge power shot is probably going to win this fight because neither guy has a very good chin. Ponzinibbio, while he hasn't been cleanly knocked out in the UFC, I mean, he did get rocked and hurt a couple times in that last fight, which was actually a really good performance against Sean Strickland, where he won all 3 rounds, but he had such a high pace that he overcame some of the getting rocked and getting hurt moments. Now, if Larkin hurts him, he's the type of fighter that will be able to pounce and put him away. But Larkin has had issues with fighters that pressure him, and while Larkin has shown a new side of himself in his last couple fights where he's been much more aggressive and much more open, he still does have a history of being a little lackluster with his output. So if that Lorenz Larkin shows up, like say the one that got completely dominated by Brad Tavares due to output and pace for the first 2 rounds to lose that fight, Ponzinibbio is going to walk all over him because of that high pace, because of the pressure. So really what it's going to boil down to is which Lorenz Larkin shows up and which fighter lands that first big shot. And I think that Ponzinibbio, because of the diversity of his overall game, will be able to do that. I do also think that it's a good thing to hear that Ponzinibbio has been training at American Top Team for this fight, and that could actually play a good factor because he doesn't have to move around and come in from Argentina or Brazil. And I think that he's actually in a good spot here. So I think Ponzinibbio pulls off the upset, and he is my pick to win this co-main event. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a middleweight contest between former light heavyweight champion Lyoto Machida, who is 22-6, and former Olympic silver medalist in wrestling Yoel Romero, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Machida minus 185, the comeback on Romero plus 145. And right now, looking over at the line, it's minus 170, plus 150. So line margin tightened up a little bit. 2-way action on this fight. It's been bouncing back and forth for a while, and the line has been out for a while. So a decent amount of action. Definitely at 5 dimes in some of the other sports books on this fight. And it's staying relatively competitive. I mean, considering Machida is one of the best UFC fighters at light heavyweight, at middleweight in recent years. I mean, the guy's definitely well respected. His stand-up striking game is something special. It's unique. It's very effective, and he's really rounded out his whole game by his takedown defense. I know he had his problems in his moments with Rockhold in his last fight, but overall his takedown defense is very good. He's hard to hold down. His fight IQ is good as well. I mean, Machida, what's not to love about the guy? So for Romero only being at plus 150, that says a lot. I mean, that says that there's a lot of respect out there for Romero and what he's capable of doing. Obviously, we know Romero is the better wrestler coming into this fight. I mean, he's a powerhouse. He's an former Olympic Cuban wrestler, silver medalist. So that says a lot right there. I mean, that's the high level type of competitor that Romero is. And not just that. I mean, he's really become, training at American Top Team, he's rounded out his game a little bit too. I mean, he's a heck of a striker. He's a unique striker in his own right as well. I mean, the way he's able to just destroy people with elbows and the angles that he takes a lot of times with his punches, everything. It's pretty fun to watch him fight, especially when he's in aggressive mode. I mean, there's not too much you could do with Romero when he turns it on. I mean, people are in trouble. That's why he's got 8 of his 9 wins, obviously, by knockout. He's that much of a powerhouse. And he's gotten better through the years. I mean, he's 38 years old now. But, I mean, in fight years, he's a little bit younger than that because, I mean, he just hasn't had a great amount of experience, especially compared to Machida, a guy like Machida. So this is an interesting fight. I mean, Romero's the better wrestler. He does have a lot of knockout power on the feet. He's very, very dangerous. Machida coming in on relatively, I don't want to say short notice, but it's a quick turnaround time. Machida actually just recently fought back in April against Rockhold, and that was a beating he took. I mean, on the ground, Rockhold just destroyed Machida. I mean, he had to go to the hospital afterwards. So in my mind, I know Machida wanted this fight. I mean, he publicly stated that he wanted a quick turnaround. That's why the UFC gave him this fight. In my mind, it's still a little quick. I mean, for especially dealing with somebody like Romero and his power and what he brings to the table here. My head says Machida is the better fighter, but my gut tells me Romero might end up knocking him out along the way. Because honestly, if this fight is not going to hit the scorecards, and if it does, Machida will outpoint Romero. I'd be very surprised to see Romero go 5 strong rounds though. So I think Machida finishes him as Romero starts fading, or Romero finishes Machida fairly early as well. So I'm going back and forth on this fight, honestly, as a pick, because it's such a compelling fight and a good matchup. And it means so much to both guys as well, because obviously the winner here takes a huge step towards the title. And if Romero wins, he might get the next shot, to be honest with you, after Rockhold here. So that's how important this fight is for both. I mean, Machida wants to rebound and get the W and get back on track and get himself right back in the title picture. So I understand it. Machida is the better mixed martial artist, but you know what? I think just the way this fight has come about with the short notice, with everything that comes into play here, I'm going to, I guess, have to lean towards Romero. And not a confident pick. I'm going to say that because everything that I just went through, but it is a dog or pass situation. I would not lay the juice on Machida at this point either because of all the things I just mentioned as well. Romero's super dangerous. I mean, Machida just taking this fight, again, a quick turnaround. He was just recently beat up. He had hand surgery as well. I know it wasn't a major big deal. He had a quick turnaround with the hand surgery as well. I think it took him like 3 weeks to recover fully, and he had a pretty solid training camp from everything that's been out there. So it shouldn't affect Machida too bad. But that being said, again, all the circumstances around this fight, I guess I have to lean a little bit more towards Romero.
Well, that's the thing that bothers me is he had 3 weeks to recover, but he's only had 8 weeks to prepare for the fight, maybe 9 total. And that's if he started training the day after the Rockhold fight ended, which I doubt. Lyoto came into that Rockhold fight in great shape. He looked super motivated. He was doing fine for about the first minute or two. And then, boom, he slips, he gets clipped, and then he got just battered, and he never recovered. And that's the type of fighter he is now. He needs to not get in that situation where he can't take the damage because he is getting older. He's all that stuff has started to accumulate throughout his career. And when he's not taking damage, when he's the guy that's just on the outside doing his thing, he's great. But if he does get hit, if he does get hurt at all, like it all goes down the window. I mean, you saw it was only the second round, but he was going through quicksand against Rockhold after barely getting saved by the bell at the end of the first round. So this is a guy that he's a bit fragile now. And while Yoel Romero is fragile too, I mean he's not a great chin by any stretch of the imagination. I mean he got knocked out in Strikeforce, he got hurt by Derek Brunson, he got hurt by Tim Kennedy, so it's very clear that this guy, if Machida hits him with something really good, Romero's probably going down. But the same can be said about Machida. Machida doesn't have the greatest chin. He's been hurt in fights. He's been knocked out as well. So, honestly, when you look at it, Machida is the more technical fighter, but Romero is the better athlete with the more power and just that more physical explosiveness that he can shoot in for a huge power double. He can get inside and land like a crazy flying knee or a huge haymaker. And I don't think Machida can handle that damage either. If you look at this fight from a cardio perspective, Machida definitely has the advantage. 5-round middleweight fight, he's done that multiple times. And while Romero's cardio is improving, I don't think he can push that kind of pace that he likes to push for 5 rounds. So really what this fight boils down to is, do you think Machida gets caught or Romero gets caught. It's that type of fight. It's a little crazy. And with Machida having such a quick turnaround after getting hurt so badly in that fight, I just can't trust him right now. And while I do think that he's an incredible talent, I mean, I picked him against Luke Rockhold. I just don't think this is a good idea to be fighting such a tough, high-level guy in Yoel Romero that's so dangerous on such short notice. So I'm actually picking Yoel Romero. I think he catches Machida at some point, whether it's with ground and pound on the canvas or just on the feet with something heavy, and I don't think Machida recovers. So my pick is Yoel Romero. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers are in agreement that Yoel Romero is dangerous. He actually has very accurate striking for someone who came from an Olympic wrestling background. His striking stats are really, really good. He scores knockdowns, he has a lot of power, and he's very precise. But we got to remember, Machida has been in this business for a very long time. This is his specialty. He is one of the most dangerous strikers in UFC history. And the guys that he's been going up against are way ahead of Romero's level of competition when it comes to these striking stats. So side by side, while it's close and they actually have very similar profiles in striking, the technical edge has to go with Machida here. He is very hard to catch, and that's given that he's been in the cage with very dangerous, experienced guys. Romero is powerful, but he's a little bit slower. He's a big guy, carries a lot of muscle in there. He has been dropped multiple times, and he gets hit more often than Machida does. So all of those things factored together says the stand-up battle, it's certainly volatile. Either guy could get a knockout win here, but you got to go with Machida. And then the question is, does it go to the mat? Romero's takedowns come early and often, but his takedown success rate is not good. He's mostly shooting from a distance, and you're not going to get Machida down that way. Or you're certainly not going to catch him, put him down, and keep him down that way. He pops up pretty well. So his scrambles are good. He's defensive. He's going to be moving a lot. He's going to be using kicks, I think. I wouldn't be surprised to see a head kick finish this fight. But you're right. There is a potential that Machida gets caught. He's now 37. He's been dinged up a few times. The war he had with Weidman probably took a toll in the long run. And there are some questions about his health in the last couple months after that last fight with Luke Rockhold. So all of that said, I expect the lines to stay relatively close for that reason. Romero is definitely a live underdog. I am leaning towards Machida. Maybe that's the less popular pick here. I think the most confident pick is that this fight does not go the distance, especially with the extra 2 rounds in the main event, and probably even sooner. Now, granted, these guys both start kind of slow. They used a very reserved striking pace. They don't test out the jab very much. So it might be a lot of feeling out and slow staring at each other for the first round. But once the sparks fly, I think Machida is going to be the one connecting, and it's going to be over quickly after that. So I'm going with Machida, but either way, I don't see this lasting 5 rounds.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 70. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes Sportsbook and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.